Good morning, guys. Um, it's my birthday, as it suggests. It's my birthday. Um, but what's funny about birthdays is that it's like the biggest excuse, to be as egotistical as you want, or something like that. It's almost like on your birthday, people will make excuses for you. Oh, but it's his birthday. You know, I'm going to let this slide because it's his birthday. Um, and so let's do this because it's his birthday. I always, I mean, I always just find that funny about birthdays. Um, I always like playing with people on that. I always like teasing people on that very concept, especially when it's on my birthday. I can just be like, yeah, but it's my birthday. I love doing that. Such a horrible excuse, but it's so funny because it's all the horrible excuses that can work for your birthday. Um, but I didn't want to just talk about my birthday. Um, I wanted to just be here and think about what I've been what I've been thinking about. And it wasn't until I was kind of reading some poems by Fernando Pessoa, where there's a poem from him where he says, "Thinking is to lose your innocence." And I thought about this. I thought about how, philosophers have a tendency to they have a tendency to embrace this um, father-like figure. They have there's something fatherly about the philosopher, something deeply fatherly about the philosopher. And I thought, I don't think there's enough motherly philosophers. I don't think there's enough motherly philosophers, actually. And of course, immediately I asked myself, well, what does that mean? A motherly philosopher. A motherly philosopher. What does that mean? What does that even imply? What am I saying when I say there isn't enough motherly philosophers? Well, I think about it like this. Immediately, I'm thinking motherly philosophers maintain some type of innocence towards the child. They maintain some type of naivety for the child. Um, and with that being said, I realized, well, if there were motherly philosophers, there wouldn't be poetry. Poetry wouldn't exist if there were motherly philosophers. Um, and it's just funny because you can tell when a man is thinking as a philosopher, right? When we bring up Don Quixote, or he's embracing that sort of more masculine type of logic, where if we talk about Don Quixote, Don Quixote is insane. He's crazy. He's schizophrenic. He's living in this fantasy world. Um, but you know, I've always, as a person, I've always felt. I would say I definitely get this from my mother. I always have like these like strong intuitions where I can't I can't explain to you why I feel like it's wrong. I just know that it's wrong. And then I realized something more about this feeling, that actually this feeling that I have, I'm using the sort of the wrong I'm using the wrong description when I say, "Oh, I feel like it's wrong." Well, actually, what I'm trying to say is that I feel like there's something missing in those very words, in those statements, right? Like they are missing a very important element when they say Don Quixote is just crazy, schizophrenic, whatever, you know. Um, and I think about this sometimes. I think me and Devu talked about this. You know, Don Quixote is kind of like a child. Um, but you know, the thing about children is that they have a sort of innocence to them, and you know, Sancho Panza, he maintains this innocence for Don Quixote. You could say he is sort of the protector of his innocence, the protector of his innocence. And and this makes me go back to what I had said about philosophers. You know, because I listen to a lot of thinkers, and sometimes they are so abrupt. They're always willing to kill your naivety, to take your innocence, right? To maybe even shatter your fantasy, whatever that may be. Um, See, this is the fatherly element of the philosopher. Why? Because they all do it for the name of truth, right? They do it for the name of truth, and it disgusts them to a degree about letting you maintain in your illusions and your innocence and your naivety and your childishness. But it's the for me it's but see that's where poetry comes in sometimes, because poetry, and I hate saying this word. I hate saying this word because I'm going to say it, like real poetry, whatever that means. I feel like real poetry gets at that element and gets at that sort of motherly element that maintains your innocence, that protects your innocence, um, till you're ready, till you are ready to burst forth from your illusions. But you know what's funny about being naive and maybe innocent is that they are in contact with truth. They are in contact with truth. And I know that's actually very hard to decipher, but I want to make it a little bit more clear. It's not that what they're claiming is true, but But it's that they are in contact with what is true. And this is, again, this is what's very difficult to sort of, I'm pushing on the edges of language like this because, you know, I think some people don't even realize this distinction that you can be in contact with truth, but it doesn't mean what they're saying is true. Um, it's very important that we think like this sometimes. But you know what concerns me is that the philosopher doesn't even know how to regain his innocence. And I think it's interesting because, it's funny about first falling in love, right? It's like when you first fall in love, you're very naive and innocent. But it would be sort of disruptive to the whole process if you were to shatter those illusions, if somebody else were to shatter those illusions intently for you. And to give you an example, I will say this, right? Just imagine you fall in love with a girl, and I say, hey, this girl that you're with, she's going to leave you. She's going to break your heart. And that's because she doesn't know anything either. She doesn't know what she's doing. Like you don't know what you're doing. Right? I could say that and attempt to shatter your innocence and your naivety. But, you falling in love, you being in contact with love, it's true. It is true. Those feelings are very well true. It is the object. It is the distinguishment that is not true. But I will not take that away from you. And see, I'm making this illusion because I see philosophers do this all the time. They don't know how to let somebody be in their illusions. They don't know how to let somebody be in their naivety, in their innocence. They don't know how. They don't know. They almost act like jealous lovers, um, like if a man had fallen in love with their woman, but actually that woman holds no ties to anybody. That wisdom, that Sophia, that woman holds no ties to anybody. But see, and for me, that as much as philosophers talk about truth, I've always felt that they understand very little about love. Very little. They understand so little about love. And because they understand so little about love, they miss perhaps one of the most important elements of truth. And it's funny because I recently came across a line in this book. I recently came across a line, Alone with the Alone, The Creative Imagination in Sufism by Ibn Arabi. And it's written by Henry Corbin. There's a note from Henry Corbin. There's a note where he writes that love cannot discern its object. It attaches itself to an object. That is true. It does. It attaches itself to its object. And it's funny because I think philosophers sometimes make truth an object. They make truth an object. But if we take what Henry Corbin is saying seriously, that love cannot discern its object. And I guess if I were to explain this a little bit further, love cannot discern its object because think about after the fact. Think about after the fact how when you love somebody, you start learning things about them. And slowly that love starts changing, right? It starts changing. But it's not that love is changing. It's that love keeps showing you that you can't discern the object because it's the object that's changing. Love cannot discern the object. And you say, my God, my love is changing. But it's not that your love is changing. It is actually the object that is changing because it's always superseding, superseding, superseding. Um, I want to read a line because there is a very important interaction in this book. Uh, Ibn Arabi and he's probably one of the greatest, in my opinion, he's one of the greatest Islamic mystics, philosophers that I have ever um, encountered. I would say that if you want to read an Islamic Spinoza that was before Spinoza and before Hegel, then I would suggest that you read Ibn Arabi, um, because I sometimes I forget that actually Ibn Arabi existed way before Spinoza did. He existed way before Spinoza did, and Ibn Arabi gave way more attributes to being. I mean, he identified more attributes to being than Spinoza did. Spinoza only identified two. And he said the rest are infinite, but there's two attributes. That's it. Um, but anyways, I'm going to read something of this here because I think it is important about, and I want to take, philosophers, I want you to take this idea, right, about when we say that we love truth. Imagine like a woman. Imagine like a woman and imagine her name to be Sophia, right? Typically, this is the image of wisdom that is down. Well, Ibn Arabi, to kind of give some context before I read this section of the text, Ibn Arabi was going around the Kaaba, and that is the sort of the Muslim pilgrimage of the stone, the Kaaba, the black stone Kaaba. And he was circling around the Kaaba, doing his prayers basically. At one night, and he had a vision, and it was it was a girl, but it turned into this beautiful Greek princess. And what ends up happening is that all of a sudden the girl kind of disappears. Afterwards, she vanishes, and Ibn Arabi begins to feel that melancholy about her perishing. But then she returns that same night, and she kind of she reproaches him. And so I'm going to read this part about her reproaching him for all of a sudden being in this melancholy and starting to doubt, right? Starting to have what they call the philosopher's doubt. So it begins like this. Suddenly, Ibn Arabi Ibn Arabi's gentle melancholy is interrupted by the reprimand of the mystic Sophia, whose apparition emerges from the very night which had inspired his reverie without issue. And then here's the quote. How, O my lord, the young girl asks, can you say, oh, to know if they know what heart they have possessed? She's sort of saying what he said. And then she says, you, the great mystic of your time, I am amazed that you can say such a thing. Is not every object of which one is the master? By that very fact in object that one knows. Can you speak of being master unless there has been knowledge? Then you said, and she's quoting him now, how my heart would like to know what mountain paths they have taken. End quote. O my Lord, the paths that are hidden between the heart and the subtle membrane that envelops the heart, those are things that the heart is forbidden to know. How then can one such as you desire what he cannot attain? How can he say such a thing? And what you did after that, ought you to suppose them safe and sound, or to suppose that they have perished? As for them, they are safe and sound. But one cannot help wondering about you. Are you safe and sound? Or have you perished, O my Lord? End quote. So you see what's funny about this whole little interaction between Ibn Arabi, right? Ibn Arabi is mourning and he's having skeptical doubts about this mystical vision that has vanished, this love that has vanished, right? And this mystic Sophia reproaches him because she says, it's interesting that you say this knowledge has vanished from you, and therefore there is doubts. But actually, those things are safe and sound. That knowledge is safe and sound. It is you who has vanished, who is not safe and sound. And then Henry Corbin adds this section, right? He sort of elaborates a little bit more. And unsparingly, reversing the question, Sophia recalls her Fidel to the truth of his mystic state. He has given in for a moment to the philosopher's doubt. He has asked questions that can only be answered by rational proofs, similar to those applying to external objects. He has forgotten for a moment that, for a mystic, the reality of theophanies, the existential status of the quote, supreme contemplated ones, end quote, depends not on fidelity to the logics of truth, but on fidelity to the service of love. Do not ask them whether they have perished. The question is whether you have perished, or whether you are still alive, whether you can still answer for them. Still permit them to invest your being. And that is the crux of the matter. What to a philosopher is doubt, the impossibility of proof, is to the fidel de amor absence and trial. And I'm going to end it there. I'm going to end it there. So you can see some of the problems that we can have about philosophy. And sometimes philosophers will claim to love truth, but in fact, the only thing that they love is, to give an example, the logic itself, right? That they love their method more than the truth. And it's funny because philosophy can catch itself in that very trap, right? They love that method more than they love truth. They are more loyal to this method of questioning, this method of doubting, this method of being skeptical, that they also deter themselves in some way from the truth. And it's funny because there's a little note in Henry Corbin's thing that says, if you truly loved, you would ask no questions. Oh, man, how funny that is. And yet it's funny because we look at people that don't ask questions, naive and ignorant, maybe just innocent. But, there is a kind of naivety and there's a kind of innocence that is in contact with the truth. But also at the same time, asks questions, but doesn't even take those questions seriously, right? That's a sort of that playful element, the child philosopher. And the only thing that I can give an example of is there's a poem by Walt Whitman where the child comes up to him and asks him, why is the leaf green? Something like that. And Walt Whitman goes into a deep, deep, deep poetic thing about the leaf being green and how he doesn't even know. I mean, if I'm recalling correctly, how he doesn't even know himself. But what's funny is that I've seen kids myself ask questions along those lines. And it's always funny because the adult will be like, they'll think for a moment, they'll be like, yeah, I don't know. And the child's like, what's funny about the child? He's like, he'll ask you the question and he'll ask himself the question. He'll be like, yeah, why is it? And then he'll just be like, oh, and he just goes off playing something. He goes off into the field and just plays with something else, right? It's like the question doesn't even bother him, right? He realizes that he doesn't know, and then he's like, and he just he's just like, oh well, I don't know. He sort of laughs it off, and he finds something else to question, or finds something else that grabs his attention and curiosity. And then he'd be like, Mom, what's this? And she's like, I don't know. And he's like, okay. Right? He pokes it, prods it, and then that's it. He's like, okay. That is for me, that is a philosopher that is in love with the world, that is in contact with truth. It may not necessarily know truth. Is in contact with truth. Knows how to be in contact with truth. Because there has been this obsession lately about falsity and truth and so on. But I'm reminded of Fernando Pessoa, and I was reading one of his poems today by one of his heteronyms, one of his other pen names that he created for himself, one of his other personalities that he made, Albert Carrero. And under this name, there's a poem that said, I really like this poem. He said, like the mountains and the plains, I take my happiness and my sadness. And I really love that because I never looked at it like a kind of landscape like that, where it's like, I was thinking about the mountains and then I was thinking about the plains, and I said to myself, well, which one is happy and which one is sad? And I know the poem may not even allude to something like that, that it's supposed to say that it comes in both like that. But it's how you embrace the landscape of the truth. Does that make sense? How do you embrace the landscape of the truth? So if I want to reframe this poem, I would say, I take my truth and my falsity. I take my loss of innocence and my innocence, as if I was looking at a picture with its mountains and its plains and its rivers and its bees and so on. Right? I take it all. Right? And this is to be and learn how to be in contact with truth. Um, and I think this is why I stress so much about poetry, because poetry teaches you how to be in contact with truth. I don't think philosophy can teach you this element, how to be in contact with truth. I don't think so. Philosophy can teach you how to think, how to ask questions, how to investigate, how to be curious, how to examine. Um, but I don't think it can teach you how to truly be in contact with truth. Which I think contact may not even be the best word, but it would be that type of contact that still maintains its naivety and its innocence. Like when a child says, why is this leaf green? And then when the parent kind of is stunned and doesn't know, and yet it haunts the parent, but for the child, he's like, whatever. There's something about that. There is something absolutely wonderful about that. And, to sort of remind us, there's actually another poem by Fernando Pessoa where he says, thinking is a loss of innocence. Thinking is a loss of innocence. So what I'm saying is that we need we can do these elements. We can do these abstract thinking, this general thinking. I mean, I'm all for it. But I think for ourselves is that there are moments, and I think Heidegger started getting like this in his later stages of life, where Heidegger he started more obsessing more about being in contact with truth rather than kind of like speaking the truth, you know. So that's a different element, and I also think about, was it Wittgenstein? Wittgenstein. I don't know if this is true. I've heard about this where Wittgenstein. Is it Wittgenstein or Wittgen? Yeah, it's Wittgenstein. Where he wrote a famous book. I think it's the Tractatus, where it's like it's so. I guess apparently it's so dense and it's so obscure that all of a sudden, by the time you get to the end of the book, he says, okay, now throw it all away. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard about that, where he basically just, you get to the end of the book and he just negates everything. Everything that you had, everything that he had previously said, everything. He just negates it all, throws it away. And I thought, wow. That I was like, that's what it must be like to maintain your innocence in some fashion. To maintain your naivety. Like, just just you do all that work, and then you just ah throw it away. And this is why I've always said that I think philosophers sometimes they take their work too seriously. They just take it way too seriously. There's another example, actually. I was reading a biography of Saint Thomas, uh, Thomas Aquinas, where he like, I think towards the end of his death, he's like, all of this is nothing but straw, you know. And some people have interpreted this in several ways, but I would say that in a positive manner, he realized that, like, all of this is nothing but straw, in terms of, like, I can't ever, I can't ever explain this. I can't ever say that this knowledge is, I own it. I can. It's all just straw. You know, um, and there's just, that's him right at the end, right, returning to his innocence and maintaining his naivety. And again, I think that's why I always stress this idea about poetry and its purpose, because real poetry, I believe, brings you back into that realm of naivety, of that childlike um, questioning, that you question it and then you just let it go. It just sort of just, and you take your sadness and your happiness too. you know, uh, I'll end here on this note. You know how people talk about the Matrix? It's like, well, uh, oh, well, I got red pilled. You're still blue pilled, or whatever pill is the truth. I forget. Um, Honestly, I don't care. I never cared. For me, I say, okay, I take my red pill and my blue pill. um, but yeah, sometimes the philosophers, I don't think they have it quite wrapped in their head that sometimes the truth wants everybody to love it in its own way. I'll leave it there. All right. All right. You guys take care. Bye.